Now, this was actually a big deal for me. This was something I did earlier this year. I traveled from where I live in France to Romania to a very good hyperbaric oxygen clinic, which is doing it at 2.4 atmospheres, so quite a high pressure. And it was at a price that I could afford. Um, and I had very high hopes for this treatment. Um, but it's obviously like, no normally speaking, my approach to trying to get better is very much geared towards supplements, brain retraining, different complementary things, pacing, trying to allow my body to heal and get better. But there's been a few times throughout my illness journey where my kind of mindset changes. And I think I'm actually prepared to take more of a risk. I'm prepared to try something that, is more involved.
Welcome to the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. In this show, you will hear expert medical professionals, researchers, and people with lived experience share science-based, low to no cost strategies to help people with complex chronic diseases. Listen in for another dose of education, empowerment, and hope. Welcome, everybody. I'm really thrilled. There is a lot of interest in today's presentation with Patrick Ussher and myself. We've known, I don't know, feels like we've known each other for a while, but it's probably only a year or so. And each time I talk to Patrick, we kind of sense that we have a lot in common in terms of our approach, our risk tolerance. We both have pretty high risk tolerance to trying new things and the way we think about some of the things we've tried. Just so if you're interested to hear more about that conversation, Patrick, maybe Megan can put the link up to the podcast that Patrick did with me that's up on my podcast page where we talk about neuroplasticity in particular and kind of what we like about it, what we don't like about it, and the different viewpoints about neuroplasticity. It was, I thought, quite a good conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick. He's actually going to be our host today, kind of introduce in a little bit more depth what we're going to do. But just for housekeeping, we're going to talk for about 40 to 50 minutes. We don't quite know yet about the things we've tried, some of which didn't work, some of which did work, some of which we're still hoping to try, and some of the lessons we've personally learned from our pretty extensive journeys. We're going to then take about an 8 to 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with time for Q&A, and you can ask about anything and everything. So over to you, Patrick.
Great. Thank you very much, Ellie. And it's a delight to be talking with you again. And a warm welcome to everyone for our conversation today. Before I say a few introductory words about what we'll be describing, I'll just introduce both myself and Ellie for those who might be unfamiliar with our work. Ellie has had ME CFS for 35 years, initially much more debilitated, but now has got a lot better over that time. She had to become, like so many of us, an expert in our own condition. And that learning about what helped her is also what led her to then want to share professionally in various contexts what has helped her over herself to improve. And that now mainly includes work as an online educator with courses, also with these webinars, and as an author. As for myself, I am an ME/CFS patient as well. I have been ill for 8 years, and I have also improved quite a lot. I was mainly housebound for the first few years, and go back 5 years ago, and I had extremely severe symptoms that actually felt and turned out they were life-threatening. Since that time, I have overall improved quite significantly. Unfortunately, I've declined to some extent again this year, but looking at last year, for example, I was doing really well, was independent, able to walk 10,000 steps a day. And so I have also, like Ellie, learned a lot of things that have helped me through a lot of trial and error. And the work I do nowadays is mainly trying to communicate research in an accessible way for other patients. And I have a YouTube channel for that, and also recently wrote a book called Understanding ME/CFS and Strategies for Healing, which really tries to summarize some very exciting research out of Germany that can potentially demystify ME/CFS. So Ellie and I originally conceived of this discussion as it's almost a bit like the BBC radio program Desert Island Discs, where people take certain music tracks to their desert island. But we were thinking, what would be the ME/CFS treatments that we would take with us if we really had to narrow it down? What are the keepers? And that got us, not just talking about treatments that have helped, but also ones that haven't. And the bigger issues around choosing treatments, cost-benefit analyses, what do we lose when we try a certain treatment? Are we doing a treatment in order to heal or in order to improve our quality of life? And kind of bigger questions like that. So what we're going to be doing this evening is we will be, or today, or this morning, or wherever you are, this evening where I am, we will be alternating back and forth, Ellie and myself, and we will be sharing, first of all, some treatments that didn't work for us, ones that we had some pretty high hopes for. And then we're going to move on to some treatments that did. And finally, we may even discuss some treatments we are excited to try in the future. And as we go, we will talk about these larger issues around decision-making process when it comes to choosing specific treatments. So with all that said, Ellie, I will now hand over to you to please tell us a bit about some of the treatments that did not work for you. And you're on mute, Ellie.
There we go. I'm sure that's better. There are so many that haven't worked. So in preparation for this, so maybe one learning that I just want to put out there to start with is keep track of what you try. So in 1998, when I started, well, 1997, I guess, is when I first met, when I met the first ME literate physician and got a accurate diagnosis and started trying things. And in 1998, I actually moved to Australia for 2.5 years. And they were actually further ahead. I was able to access several functional medicine physicians in Australia and learned a lot about functional medicine, which of course I hadn't been taught in medical school. I then came back to Calgary and really dug in and continued to learn and started going to IACFS ME conferences in 2001. And I've been to almost every one since then. And when you go to those conferences, of course, you meet people who believe that they have the solution. And so in the course of those conferences, I met several people who had developed protocols. And all of these people were credible. They were all physicians. Most of them were university professors. Most of them had really big like patient populations that they had tried their protocol on. At least that's what they said, literally hundreds to thousands of people. And so when they would come to a conference and say, here's the protocol, here's the scientific rationale for the protocol, I, in my younger, naive way, thought, oh, okay, this must work. If it worked for like 1,000 or 10,000 other people, why would it not work for me? So some of the protocols I tried over the years were the Demierlier protocol. So some of you know or remember Kenny Demierlier. He's still working, I think, in Belgium. He developed some lab tests that purported to show alterations that were measurable and that were defining who had ME and who didn't. And then he had a protocol based on your lab results. And I did the protocol, and guess what? Nothing happened. Then I tried Paul Cheney's protocol. So Dr. Cheney, he has passed away, but some of you old timers may remember him. And he, again, had a very unique idea that it was really ME was a cardiovascular issue, increased preload. And we now, of course, know that he was right. The work from Harvard with David Systrom is really validating Dr. Cheney's work. I'm not sure he lived long enough to kind of be vindicated. But the treatment that he proposed was something I call buffalo goo. So I live in Canada. We have bison here, so I'm pretty familiar with them. So it was basically the mushed up adrenal glands of bison. And he believed that if you put it on your skin, it would shift your cardiac function. And I traveled to his clinic at massive expense, underwent the tests. Sure enough, just like all the other tests I've done, like thousands and thousands of tests, I had all the key abnormalities of ME. I tried the buffalo goo and it didn't work. Not only didn't it work, but it was during that time that I was trying it that I got a skin disease that I'm still struggling with, 2009, so 16 years later, that's causing me untold amounts of grief. So my second take-home message is sometimes the treatment that you're trying will actually make you worse. So you really have, I think my level of caution was perhaps too low. It never occurred to me that something recommended by someone who I had personally met, who seemed very credible, who was very smart, who had, claimed to have had success in hundreds or even thousands of individuals could potentially be harmful. I would say I'm now wiser. So I'll pause there and go back to Patrick to mention a few that haven't worked for him.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. So there's a few themes there that are relevant for me too. But the first treatment that I want to talk about that didn't work for me is hyperbaric oxygen at the medical grade level. Now, this was actually a big deal for me. This was something I did earlier this year. I traveled from where I live in France to Romania to a very good hyperbaric oxygen clinic, which is doing it at 2.4 atmospheres, so quite a high pressure. And it was at a price that I could afford. And I had very high hopes for this treatment. But it's obviously like, normally speaking, my approach to trying to get better is very much geared towards supplements, brain retraining, different complementary things, pacing, trying to allow my body to heal and get better. But there's been a few times throughout my illness journey where my kind of mindset changes. And I think I'm actually prepared to take more of a risk. I'm prepared to try something that, is more involved. And 60 sessions of medical grade hyperbaric, traveling alone to a different country, falls into that category. And it's because I feel, I want to get better and this is going on too long. So sometimes I make that kind of decision. And I didn't think that hyperbaric would cure me. I thought it might improve my baseline health, improve my stamina, so that I would be in a position, a better able position. My body would be better able to actually spiral upwards towards health. So I was more thinking of it as a conduit to better functionality and health. But unfortunately, the result was that it actually lowered my baseline capacity. I went from being able to do 7,000 or 8,000 steps a day to 4,000 or 5,000, and my crashes were more severe. And this is because I think now, that hyperbaric, especially at the high pressures, is actually exerting a stress on the body, particularly at a cellular level that people with ME/CFS might be quite sensitive to. And so this is something that, there's quite a lot of discussion about hyperbaric. There's quite a lot of discussion of the mechanisms in general. And so on paper, those mechanisms looked good. It should improve blood perfusion. It should improve mitochondrial health. But in my case, what was on paper did not meet the biological reality of how my body responded to the treatment. And I kind of look back now and wish that actually I could have given myself permission to stop. That maybe after 20 sessions, I could have said, okay, I'm not getting that good feeling about this. But I had invested a lot of hope into it. It was obviously a big trip, etc. And there's also this idea that does have some scientific backing that often there's a delayed response to hyperbaric. So I kept going. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. And another issue that this raises, this experience with hyperbaric, is we just don't have a lot of data in its usefulness or in its uses for ME/CFS. We do have a couple of papers of it being studied for long COVID, and there it showed a modest sustained benefit. And that was kind of what I was going on when I made the decision to go. But in terms of ME/CFS, there's only actually one bigger paper that's being done right now. I know the interim results. It's from the Charité University in Berlin. And what they've actually found is that, yes, the ME patients after 40 sessions were feeling better at the end and feeling better after 1 month. But 3 months later, they actually were pretty much back to baseline in terms of their symptoms. And so I wish I wish that paper or those interim results was out already before I was actually going to head off to Romania. But that's part and parcel of what we deal with ME/CFS, is we're often fumbling around in the dark and we don't have a lot of data to go on when it comes to treatments. So that's my first disappointing treatment, Ellie, and I'll hand back over to you now.
Right. So I've also tried hyperbaric. I'll mention it, but I think before that, I just wanted to say, for me at least, and I'm guessing, Patrick, it's the same for you, that everything I'm talking about today that I've tried is on the background of self-management. So every single day, I eat the healthiest diet possible. I try to be active. I do my best to get an appropriate amount of sleep. I work on my mindset, all of those things. So just to say, none of the things I'm going to talk about, I think would have benefit in isolation. I think my belief is basic self-management is absolutely fundamental, and the specific treatments we try are on top of that. They're an add-on, but they're not a instead of. So I tried hyperbaric, oh my gosh, really, really long time ago. I believe I did 40 treatments. I may have even done 20 additional treatments later on. It didn't, nothing happened during the course of the 40 treatments. But towards the end of it, which was, 2 months, right? Because you kind of go weekdays. I noticed that my energy was better. So this is before I started feeling better. This is pre-2017. So that increased energy I remember going hiking that summer, something I hadn't done in a really long time, and feeling good and not crashing. But unfortunately, it wore off. So it probably lasted for 2 to 3 months. I looked back at my records and I think I went back for an additional 20 treatments, but it made no difference. The effect continued to wear off until I was back to baseline. And at that point, like, hyperbaric is very expensive. At that point, I decide, you know what, I can't justify the money to keep doing it on an ongoing basis. And so I stopped. I'm just going to talk about a couple more protocols that some of you may be familiar with. So one is the Shoemaker protocol. So Dr. Richie Shoemaker has the belief that ME is caused by toxins caused by mostly like water damage building, so mold-related toxins being the most common. So he also has a whole testing protocol, which is very difficult and expensive. And I managed to get it going in Calgary, and me and several of my patients did the tests. And yet again, I showed the classical profile that you would expect for someone with CIRS, C-I-R-S, chronic immune, can't remember what the R is, syndrome. So basically that your immune system is super hyperactive due to the mold. I then did his protocol. Nothing happened. I did the Paul protocol. Martin Paul, I believe he's also passed away. So he has a very elegant protocol. He's not an MD, he's a PhD. So his protocol was theoretical, not something he ever had a chance to try out in patients, but it has to do with oxidative damage and oxidative nitrogen and oxygen species. And his protocol is all about tamping that down with antioxidants and intermediates. Guess what? Nothing happened, except that I'm poorer each time, because all of these protocols, once you do all the tests and the treatment, it's, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And the last protocol I did was the Myhill protocol. Some of you are familiar with Sarah Myhill from the UK, and she would come across to many of the IACF-SME meetings. And I thought the mitochondrial tests that her lab offered were really brilliant. We have, I'll say, more sophisticated tests now, but for a decade or more, her tests were really the gold standard. I was never able to get that test done for myself. It was just too hard to get my blood to the UK. But I did the protocol nonetheless, which is basically supporting the mitochondria, and it made no difference. Another protocol I did is Patricia Kane. So her hypothesis is that chronic disease has to do with dysfunctional lipids or fats, probably because we're eating back in the day trans fats and other types of fats that are not the right consistency to allow our cell membranes to function optimally. So I did the Kane protocol is pretty intense, and it includes intravenous phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine. Did nothing. And I've tried it on more than one occasion because it's available in Calgary and at huge expense, right? Whenever you do something that's intravenous, every treatment is probably $200+. What I want to say about all those is all the protocols made sense. The theories made sense. There was research evidence to say mitochondria aren't working well. Why? So it would make sense that supporting them would help. Or I do have SIRS. I mean, my immune markers are like through the roof. So it would make sense that trying to decrease mold toxins in my body would help me. I guess another one I can put in there is heavy metals. I have really high levels of multiple heavy metals. I've done, I can't even count the number of protocols, including IV chelation, over many, many years, and it has made no difference. So just because you read about something and the rationale makes sense, the science looks solid, the person recommending it or people recommending it are legitimate, they're not in it for the money, they're not personally benefiting. Like if I send my blood away to Quest or LabCorp in the US, Dr. Shoemaker doesn't benefit from that personally whatsoever. So it passes all of the check boxes of what a legitimate treatment might look like. And yet, in my case, big goose egg. I'll go back over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. Before I mention the next treatment that didn't work for me, I just pick up on what a few people are saying in the comments about mild hyperbaric and saying that that can actually potentially work better for ME/CFS. And I would personally now think that's the way to go if you're going to try it. And I had just seen a lot of experts who kind of dismissed mild hyperbaric, said it's not the real deal, don't bother with it. But actually, I think it's very well suited for ME/CFS and a much better way to start and potentially encourage or influence some kind of healing response. The next treatment that I wanted to talk about that didn't work for me is T3 thyroid hormone. Now, this is a treatment actually that at a time and still to some extent is kind of in vogue in the ME/CFS world. There are some quite well-known doctors who recommend it. And it's essentially, well, I don't want to get down in the weeds about the physiology of it, but it's essentially treating a kind of hypothyroidism which often exists in ME/CFS, which is different from classic hypothyroidism. So it's called low T3 syndrome. All of your standard thyroid labs may come back normal. There may be some slight cases where some things are a little on the lower end of the reference range, but they're coming back normal. And yet you still have hypothyroid symptoms. And this is something that about 4 years ago I was thinking was the case with me. I had hypothyroid symptoms. I talked to my consultant, who actually specializes in ME/CFS in Ireland, and he got me to do a reverse T3 test, which is what people use to diagnose this kind of hypothyroidism, if the doctor knows about it. And lo and behold, I had a very high reverse T3. And so what my consultant suggested was, I think you should try T3 monotherapy. So you're taking quite a high dose of T3, which is the active thyroid hormone. So the idea is that you'll definitely get your thyroid metabolism to work well because you're taking the active form of it. Unlike if you're taking levothyroxine T4, which is inactive and still has to be converted into T3, which may run into trouble in this kind of hypothyroidism. So this was the recommendation, and I have to say that I was quite hesitant because I knew that if you take T3 at a high enough dose, you completely suppress your thyroid. It goes asleep because from the body's perspective, you don't need to create thyroid hormone if there's enough circulating T3. So I was kind of concerned about that. But at the same time, I was pretty ill. This was my housebound phase for the most part. And I kind of said to myself, look, if I potentially have to take one hormone replacement for the rest of my life, if that's what it leads to, could be temporary, but even if it's the rest of my life, then fine. If it makes me feel better, if it even could help me to recover, because some people, do really well with this. So I took T3 and I ended up taking it for almost 3 years. But what I learned over this process is that simple narratives do not map on to this complex organism that is our human body. And this is a quite a simplistic narrative. It's not just in the ME/CFS world. You see it all over the thyroid corners of the internet. The same story of you're having difficulty converting T4 to T3. You've got high reverse T3. Take T3. But what actually ended up happening was two things. I became my cortisol output lowered pretty dramatically. I actually ended up living with a quasi-Addisonian level of cortisol for those years. It was only towards the end that I worked that out. And I was still hypothyroid. I hadn't even managed to correct that. And the reason that both of these problems developed is that in a healthy human being, the thyroid creates a fair dose of T3 in the middle of the night, and that T3 goes to the adrenal glands and kicks them into action to create cortisol. And that's part of what creates that morning wakening response of cortisol. But if you are taking T3 at a high dose and you've made your thyroid dormant, and it comes to the middle of the night, well, there's no stimulus, there's nothing that happens, your thyroid's not working. So your adrenal glands never get the prod to create the cortisol. And so about 2.5 years in or thereabouts, I did a cortisol test and it was very low. And I then found a very good guy called Paul Robinson, who's written a few books on T3 therapy. It's you can find them on Amazon, but he actually ran into this problem as well. And his solution was to take his first dose of T3 in the middle of the night, and that worked really well for him, and then he actually recovered. But basically, that was why so my cortisol had tanked. I had all these terrible, pretty much every morning I felt awful for these years because I wasn't getting that morning response. And I was also still hypothyroid because T3 and cortisol actually work together to get into the cells. So because I didn't have enough cortisol in the morning, the T3 wasn't really doing much either. So it really was an experiment that didn't go very well. And so my main takeaway from this, and by the way, I should say, I made the decision to go off the T3 then. But my main takeaway from this experience is, sometimes it might actually be better to have the problem. In this case, this kind of hypothyroidism that comes to pass in ME/CFS is often, maybe not always, but is often a kind of response to the rest of the illness. So it's a bit like this cell danger response idea that someone mentioned in the chat. or the idea that the body's entering a hypometabolic state, a low metabolic state. And the thyroid is simply responding to that and kind of following suit. And so in a way, it's kind of what the body actually needs. It's what it's doing. Um, and so what I came to learn is that by applying this rather blunt solution to a situation where my body's wisdom was actually, driving the show, I actually ended up creating more problems. So that was a big learning for me. And I kind of wish I just tried to improve my health and then see could that reverse T3 number come down. So Ellie, back over to you.
Wow, you said so much there, Patrick. I've been taking all these notes. One point, which I know more so from being a physician than being a patient, because I've worked with thousands of people, is everybody is so different. So I'm noticing in the chat, I didn't catch all of them, but I could see some people are saying, oh, T3 worked for me or hyperbaric worked for me. And that's what's so tricky, working with thousands of patients, I came to know whenever I would go to a conference or read a paper and I'd say, okay, everybody, this is the new thing we're all going to try. Probably about a third of the people would benefit, about a third, nothing would happen, and a third would actually get worse or have, unforeseen side effects like Patrick's mentioned with the T3. And that's so far true for every single treatment. And I've tried literally hundreds of treatments, and many of them have not stood the test of time. And it's because when we actually do a placebo-controlled trial, it takes out some of that noise. And we can see that so far, we don't have any treatment, perhaps other than pacing, that really works consistently. Patrick also mentioned, I'm just kind of going back a step to the hyperbaric and just philosophically the difference between going hard or going light, like do the heavy 2.4 atmosphere hyperbaric or the lighter 1.8, 2.0 hyperbaric. And what I've learned in the last couple of years, I would say, and that I talk a lot about to my membership, is the concept of hormesis, meaning it looks like doing little intermittent exposures to things that are slightly stressful to the body is much more beneficial than what I call boot camp. So I think for anyone with ME, if you're ever making a choice, should I go hard or go home? That used to be the motto of my skating team, and for that it was very effective. But for ME, it's the wrong way to go. Boot camp, big X through it. Okay, what are some of my other failures? Oh yeah. Lyme disease, right? So there's people out there, just like Dr. Shoemaker believes that most, if not all, people with ME actually have mold exposure. There's people who believe, and again, I've met many of them at many conferences over the years, that all of us, if not, or most, if not all of us, have Lyme and various co-infections. So I've had many, many infective tests over the years, again, at considerable expense because they're all private outside of Canadian healthcare. And guess what? I have tested positive for things like chlamydia, mycoplasma. That was back 30 years ago, and then more recently, Lyme disease. And I managed, I think because I'm a physician, to find a local infectious disease specialist who was willing to approve intravenous antibiotics because I was pretty sick at the time, and it did nothing. And my Lyme test, after the antibiotics looked identical to my Lyme test before the antibiotics. And then maybe there's so many. Antioxidants. So over the many, many, 35 plus years that I've been going to conferences, knowing that anybody with a chronic disease has a higher level of oxidative stress than a healthy person, and that research I think is pretty solid, people then in a linear way think, oh, kind of like Patrick said, if this is wrong and if our T3 is low and we add T3, that should fix the problem. Or if our mitochondria aren't functioning and we support them with various supplements, that should fix the problem. But I agree with Patrick that and Dr. Cheney used to talk about this. So again, he was ahead of his time. He used to sit at the back of the room in the conferences, and when people were promoting simplistic solutions, he'd shake his head. And if you went up to talk to him, he'd say, many of the problems people are talking about are the result of the illness and not the cause of the illness. And I think Dr. Navio's work about the cell danger response kind of is confirming that. The mitochondria are down-regulating, not causing the illness, but as a result, it's like a self-preserving mechanism of the body. And I remember Dr. Cheney saying, if you try to override our body's attempt to protect us, you're going to run into trouble. So most of the antioxidant protocols are a way of trying to override the physiology. Also, things like Myers cocktails, very popular, and numerous intravenous, like intravenous B vitamins, intravenous magnesium, even amino acids, the fats I've already talked about. So all of those things are trying to fix a deficit, which can be measured objectively by tests. And for me personally, none of them worked. For me, when I take antioxidants, even to this day, they actually flare my immune system and I get more symptoms instead of less. So since 2009, I've had to avoid all antioxidants. Maybe one or two more things, and then I'll send it back over to Patrick. So MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, is awareness about MCAS is increasing. And I have been diagnosed with MCAS. I have some of the markers, again, on expensive tests. And I've tried pretty much every single MCAS treatment, that's easily available to me, and none have made any difference. People have talked about low-dose naltrexone. That's also incredibly popular at the moment. I've tried it on 2 separate occasions. So we always have to be careful. Well, what does trying mean, right? And when Patrick said he was on the T3 for 3 years, I think no one could argue that that was a very robust trial, right? He didn't try it for a week, decided it didn't work and stop it. So similarly with LDN, I've tried it twice for 6 months at a time, up to 6.0 milligrams at bedtime, and it does nothing at all. So this is not to doubt the people, like probably some of you on this call are on LDN, low dose naltrexone, and it's helping you in various ways. But it just shows that we're all so different and it doesn't help everyone. So someone just put up another, it just went up so fast, something about intravenous. Sorry, let me just go to the chat because it was one that I've also done. I mean, pretty much everything. Oh, right, glutathione, right. So there's lots of great research showing that people with ME have lower levels of reduced glutathione in their body and in their brain. And therefore, you would think, because in Parkinson's disease, where they also have low glutathione in the brain, many people report that taking intravenous glutathione gives temporary reprieve from the Parkinson's symptoms. And some people, like a lot of IV clinics, offer glutathione. I've tried it untold number of times, nada. Someone just asked in the chat which antioxidants. I'll just say any antioxidant, like that's in a supplement form. So if I take an orange, no problem. But if I take vitamin C as a supplement, vitamin E, NF-kappa B inhibitors, ARE inhibitors, I can't remember all the different oxidant pathways, but trust me, I've done dozens, if not hundreds, of antioxidants over 35 years. Over to you, Patrick. I think that's all I've got. So after you, we can maybe move on to what did help.
Well,
Drum roll. Yeah.
Yeah, drum roll, absolutely no. Well, tell you what, I'll go straight to something that helped me.
Okay.
Now, so let's now switch to the positive.
Yeah.
So the first treatment that I want to talk about that really helped me is actually called help apheresis. Now, that doesn't stand for help as in help me. It stands for heparin extracorporeal lipoprotein slash fibrinogen precipitation. And that's a sort of very fancy way of saying that it's a blood washing procedure where your blood goes out of one arm, it goes into a filter. In the filter, there's a lot of a blood thinning medication, heparin, which many of you may have heard of, but it's at a very, very high dose in the filter. It's about 20 times higher than the oral dose you would typically take. And then your blood is in contact with the heparin, it's washed, and it goes back in the other arm. And this is a treatment that's been around for a long time. It is a conventional medical treatment that is available in many German dialysis centers. And it's previously been used for people with various heart problems and things of that nature. But it was kind of repurposed, as it were, during the COVID pandemic for patients with long COVID and then also for patients with ME/CFS, because this finding of microclots, which seem to be one part of the various, cogs in the ME/CFS pathophysiology, these were identified, and this particular treatment is actually very well suited to dealing with microclots because it's thinning the blood with the heparin, and so it's reducing clotting factors, and it can also take the microclots out. So this is something that I actually did about 2.5 years ago. I traveled from France to Germany for this, was super nervous about it, very, very anxious. I kind of had got some independent living back at that stage. I would live maybe 15 minutes away from my dad in a village, but a lot of the time I was still living with him as well. And so going to Germany on my own to have my blood washed was a very scary kind of proposition. But a bit like with the hyperbaric, I'd reached one of those moments where I was prepared to take a greater risk. I was doing the pacing pretty well. I was doing my brain retraining. I was doing my Buteyko method, which I'll talk about later, my dietary stuff, and I plateaued and still could have very bad crashes. And that feeling of this is going on was quite strong in me. So I decided to go for it. And this is something that I'm very glad I did. As scary as it was, it worked out very well. And I wanted to show you all some photographs from my time there, which kind of speak to how this treatment was truly medically necessary for me. So that's me doing the treatment. You can see the filter on the left and me pretending to look relaxed. Um, and this is the picture of my blood before and after. So what you can see on the left is that my blood was so dark that it was essentially black in appearance. This is something that the doctor in the clinic and the nurse told me applied to all of their ME/CFS and long COVID patients that they had seen. Their blood was darker. And this is because the microclots condense the blood so much that just like with any condensed liquid, it can take on a darker appearance. And so my blood was dark and it was sluggish. It was really, really kind of slow. So I had 7 treatments over 2 months. And the photograph on the right is taken from the last moments of my final treatment. And so you can see this huge difference between the two. And not only had my blood color normalized, but it was also flowing again really well. It wasn't sluggish at all because the machine is very clever and it can tell if your blood is too sluggish, and it will send out a kind of warning to add more isotonic saline to kind of get the blood moving. And that warning system had completely stopped by the end of my treatment. I'd gone from needing 1.5 liters extra isotonic saline each treatment to just the standard 300 milliliters that they use anyway. So this was medically essential for me. And I say that because, first of all, this is horrendous. But secondly, I used to have horrible symptoms related to this, which went away after I did the treatment. A terrible kind of chest pressure. But one of the worst symptoms was I used to get the feeling that the blood flow into my brain was so bad that I feared having a stroke. And I also used to get these auras, these quite strong auras that coincided with my heartbeat, which were really quite terrifying at times. And they went away after this treatment, which I think I could say improved me a good 20% altogether. Um, so I'm very glad that I actually, did take on my fears and jump into the unknown to do this. And that process of jumping into the unknown is something that I kept with me, that I actually do have more resourcefulness despite being chronically ill than I might have thought, and more capacity to adapt. But my other big takeaway from this particular treatment was, as ME/CFS patients, unfortunately, we are often, dismissed by the medical profession, or not, at least not helped very much, or we feel that there's not much there for us. There may be some medications like LDN or whatever that, can help people, but we often feel that it's not there for us as a system. But this is a good example of a conventional medical treatment which actually does target one aspect of the ME/CFS pathophysiology, and it does it really well. And it can reset it. And what I hope for in the future is that we have many treatments like this, because there's so many parts of this interlinking vicious cycle that is ME/CFS. Microclots is just one of them. But if we can have these kinds of things that patients can do, and actually you reset one of the main burdens, and then the body can feel better and hopefully more likely move towards healing, then that could only be a good thing. So this was an example really for the first time in my journey of being ill, that I was surrounded by conventional doctors and they were listening and they had something really to offer. And there was no question that I was, suffering from something psychosomatic or anything like that. So that was a really, really nice change. So that was my first helpful treatment, Ellie. And now I'll pass over to
Sure.
you to tell us a bit more about your first one.
Well, I would say if we're going in order of occurrence, the first one was definitely um, Florinef and oral electrolytes. So the very first ME literate physician I saw back in 1997. So keep in mind, this is a full 8 years after I became ill, right? 8 years in the wilderness before meeting somebody who actually knew something. She did, now it's called the Nassau Lean test, but she basically did a standing blood pressure test. And sure enough, my blood pressure was like 90 on 40 or something. And she said, you're going to feel a lot better if you take more fluids and salt. And if you take Florinef, which is fludrocortisone, which is kind of an analog of the natural hormone that keeps salt in our body so that we don't pee it out. So we keep salt and then the water follows and we have more blood volume. It's been shown even back in the day with Dr. David Bell and Dr. David Streeton back in the 90s that people with ME have up to 30% less blood than an average person. And more recent work out of the Netherlands, Dr. Visser, I'm sorry, I can't remember the other researcher, and Dr. Peter Rowe is kind of a collaborator there, are basically confirming that this 20-year-old research is true. So even to this day, so that was in 1997, so almost 30 years ago, I started Florinef. If I miss a day now, it's not a problem, but if I miss 2 or 3 days, I start feeling all of the symptoms of orthostatic intolerance. Um, and the other thing I tried early on was sauna. So I was going to a lot of integrative medicine conferences, and the wife of a local colleague said, Ellie, you have to get a sauna. So she was really big on sauna for detox. And again, she thought everybody is ill because they have toxins, right? So everyone has their somewhat linear model of why we're sick. And I said, but I can't do a sauna. I have low blood pressure. I feel horrible in the heat. It's something I actively avoid. She said, oh, trust me, it'll be fine. So I go and buy, a sauna. And it turned out to be one of the best things ever. She's right. I totally tolerate it. And whenever I'm at home, I sauna regularly. I set my so there's so many different sauna protocols. I set my temperature to about 70 degrees centigrade. And I'm usually lying down because I have orthostatic intolerance, so I lie down whenever possible. And after every single sauna, I feel better. Now, what I now know, oh, and I stay in for 30 to 40 minutes until I've really sweat a lot. And so I have my glass next to me with water and electrolytes. Now that I've learned more about hormesis, I realize that the benefits of sauna are multiple. They are getting rid of toxins. That's the original reason I bought my sauna. But heat is a hormetic stress, meaning if you do it intermittently, not too crazy hot, for just the right amount of time, it challenges the body to release heat shock proteins, and heat shock proteins make all of our metabolism function better and make us more resilient. So another lesson I've learned recently is that many of the things I've been doing for years, kind of empirically, I tried them, they helped me, I've kept doing them. I now, learning about hormesis and quantum biology, I'm starting to understand the science behind why they work, which makes me even more confident, that I want to keep doing both heat and cold. So you can see where I am. That's where I woke up yesterday morning, and there was a lake, and the lake water is probably like I just put my feet in, and I could only stay in about a minute. I think it's pretty close. It's probably in the low single digits centigrade, but I do it on a regular basis because I now understand how it benefits my body. Over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, just before I go on to my next one, I'll just briefly mention I've never tried Fluorinef, but one treatment that has been an absolute game changer for me is switching to most of my fluids coming in the form of oral rehydration solution. And I currently drink around 2 liters a day of ORS. It's a very effective way of boosting your blood volume. I'd say it's more effective than just adding salt to your food. It's also safer than doing that. There can be problems in my opinion, if you just add a lot of salt to your food. I'm not sure about that approach. Some is fine, but and it's also more effective than just the kind of classic electrolyte supplements because it's very targeted. I mean, it's the same formula that the World Health Organization recommend for catastrophic fluid loss in cases like diarrhea or vomiting. So it's very effective at getting the kind of salty solution back into the bloodstream. And for me, it was, as I say, it was a game changer. There can be times when I'm in post-exertional malaise and I can't move, I'm stapled to the couch, and I drink, a liter over the morning, say, and it almost has a biblical effect. It's like I get up and walk. It really is a very neat, straightforward way of getting the blood volume up. Obviously, it doesn't only last a few hours, but it does give relief for the time that I drink it. So the next thing that I would take to my desert island, and going from the last one, which was kind of elaborate and quite costly, I wanted to think of something that's free and that reliably improves my quality of life. And for me, that is the Buteyko method. That's Buteyko. Now, this is something that I've kind of been looking into for many years, and the first few years it was always so confusing to me. And I used to do it and just feel worse and end up hyperventilating, and I could never get it. But eventually I kind of worked out how to do it. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's from a Soviet doctor, Professor Konstantin Buteyko, and he came to the conclusion that many people are deficient in carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide as a gas is not actually a waste gas, but has some very important positive properties for the human body. And some people, interestingly, think that what, for example, in ancient Ayurveda is called prana, or ancient Indian teachings is prana, may in fact be CO2. Anyway, Dr. Buteyko developed this method of keeping CO2 in the body and increasing the levels. And there's various ways in which this kind of helps. The first big thing is that as a gas, it's actually a vasodilator. So it will open the blood vessels up and therefore improve tissue oxygenation or tissue perfusion. And it's also a kind of conduit. The more CO2 you have in the bloodstream, the better able hemoglobin is able to release oxygen into the cells. So it's also a conduit for the release of oxygen into the tissues. And in these two very important ways, it targets problems in the ME/CFS pathophysiology, which is just this global state of blood hyperperfusion and tissue hypoxia. And in fact, research has shown that ME/CFS patients can have lower carbon dioxide levels than normal, also long COVID patients. And this is probably happening as a downstream consequence of other problems in the illness. It's not just kind of happening of its own accord, but as a response. And then when people get lower CO2 levels, they start to hyperventilate or have deeper breathing, which then leads them to blow out even more carbon dioxide, and you get into another vicious cycle of which, for which ME/CFS is so characteristic. So I learned the Buteyko method from a wide, different groups, and rather frustratingly, they often teach different things. So my own practice is kind of a hodgepodge. But one group that I do think is a helpful place to start, and they actually offer 5-day workshops on Zoom for free, fairly regularly. They're called Learn Buteyko Online. So Learn Buteyko Online. They kind of give a helpful foundation. But I have found that whenever I practice this, my quality of life reliably improves. I feel calmer. My body feels more at ease. I can feel the blood getting into different parts of my body. My perfusion and circulation improves. And I feel warmer. And sometimes, particularly when I'm practicing the exercises, that feeling of warmth is very pleasant. It comes as such a relief when you're not getting enough blood flow to your brain to suddenly actually, really be able to perfuse is a very nice feeling. So the key aspect of the method is reducing your breathing to a tolerable air hunger, holding it there and allowing the carbon dioxide to build up. It can be quite uncomfortable at first, but your body and your brain does get used to it with practice, and it can then become fairly pleasant. So that's the kind of core aspect, is this breath reduction by about 10-15%. You tolerate it, and then the CO2 builds up. There are other techniques as well, something called maximum pauses, which is a kind of long breath hold after an exhalation, where you're creating doses of carbon dioxide. But anyway, there are various techniques. But for me, I think this is it's very well adapted to the ME/CFS pathophysiology. It's totally free. It just requires, consistent practice. Yeah, it reliably works. And so it's been great for me to have that tool that I can call upon, and it always actually does help me out. And it also helps with my sleep as well, I should say, as I've had problems with insomnia, sometimes quite severe. And it's very helpful for sleep. I find I fall asleep easier, and I wake up around 5:30, actually feeling alive. So yeah. So that's my second most helpful tool, Ellie.
Okay, I'm just noticing the time, and this is going to be my last share before the break, just so that we don't exhaust people too much. Megan is going to put in the chat the link to a survey. Basically, the survey is asking you the same question that many of you are already answering in the chat, which is what things have worked for you and what things have not worked or made you worse. What we're planning to do, or what Megan's going to be doing, is basically computing all of the answers that you put in the survey, and then we'll make it available to you later on through social media. So if you take the time to fill out the survey, it literally has 2 questions after we identify you, and we're going to ask you 5 stars, how did you like today's session? But there's 2 real questions, what worked and what didn't. We're going to compile that and hand it back to you so that we can all learn from each other. I would say probably one more thing I want to share, maybe 2 more things. One is the AIP diet. So that stands for Autoimmune Protocol Diet. That was recommended to me in 2016 by one of my physicians. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. I'm never going to be able to do it. It basically is eating animal protein, fruit, and vegetables, period. So no dairy, no milk. I guess that is animal protein, so I'll be more clear. So meat protein. But when I say meat, then some people say, well, does that mean fish? So anything that was previously moving, if you eat the flesh of it, that's in the diet. But no grains, no legumes, no seeds, no nuts, no dairy, no eggs. I did that diet for about a year and a half before I suddenly got dramatically better. I wasn't sure, of course, that it had anything to do with the diet because the timing was so delayed. But since 2017, so that's in the 8 years since then, as you can imagine, I've cheated on the diet untold number of times because it's such a difficult diet to be on, and you're out and you want to partake in whatever everybody else is eating. And every time I eat those foods, and the rationale of the diet is that all of those foods activate the immune system. So for someone who has an active immune system, this is to be avoided. And every time I feel I'm cured and I can easily eat these foods with reckless abandon, I relapse. Luckily now I catch it really early, get back on the diet, and things recover pretty quickly. I don't have to wait a year and a half. So for me, that's a keeper. And I just pray that the desert island I'm on has enough of those types of foods. And the other one that many of you have heard me talk about is molecular hydrogen. So molecular hydrogen, I started a year and a half ago after I heard a podcast with Alex Tarnava, who's the patent holder for the little tablets that you drop in water that reacts with the water and creates the molecular hydrogen. So I've done a lot of reading and learning, and my best understanding is it helps balance redox, reduction and oxidation. So as opposed to antioxidants that are heavy-handed and come in and push the system in a particular way, molecular hydrogen will help it balance in the middle, whether you're too far on the reduction side or too far on the oxidation side. It doesn't force the system, it allows it to balance. And for me, so that's the only product I've ever taken that is anything to do with redox that I've tolerated. I have no side effects whatsoever. And it's helped, I would say it's helped me in energy, in pain, and in mood, and a little bit with regards to sleep. I'm going to leave it there. People can ask, there's a lot of questions coming up in the chat, and we can try to address those after the break. Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ellie. Well, as you say, just keeping an eye on the time, I'll just briefly leave with maybe some different thoughts here in terms of the way of thinking about healing. And I think that as, ME/CFS patients, we have this overwhelming landscape of things to try. And we're often, very concerned, to improve, and we think we need to do this treatment and that treatment. And sometimes we really do. I needed to do the HELP apheresis. That situation was pretty bad. But I also think we mustn't forget our body's own healing capacity. And it can be something that we actually forget about because of how awful this illness can feel. But something that often humbles me and is even quite moving, are times when I have a very bad crash, I can't move, it's really difficult, but my body slowly pulls me out of it. And it does that because it's still set its compass on healing. Now, one thing that we know from recent research, I'll just show you briefly. If I can. Here. One thing we know from recent research is that when people crash, this doesn't happen in every case, but it happens in some cases, you actually can experience muscle tissue necrosis. That is to say, muscle tissue death during PEM. And this is one of the reasons why it feels so awful. This is work from Rob Woost in the Netherlands, using this is people 1 day into PEM, and this kind of gooey stuff. This is dead muscle tissue, and that's obviously awful. But what they also find in that study is that the muscle also regenerates. And given how awful this illness is and how complex it is, it's actually very moving to think that the body does that, in such a circumstance. And one thing I often ask myself is, what would happen? Like, you get out of the crash because your body still wants to heal, but what would happen if you let it continue healing? Because oftentimes we feel a bit better and we just overdo it or slightly overdo it, and we go back into that boom bust cycle. But what would happen if we didn't crash for 50 days, for 100 days, for 300 days, for a whole year? What might our bodies actually be capable of then if they can get us out of muscle tissue necrosis? Because ultimately our body doesn't want this illness any more than we do. And Professor Ron Davis at Stanford, he thinks that not crashing for a very long period of time is the way out. And he cites the example of a graduate student of his who ended up pretty bad with ME/CFS. She was mainly bedridden, housebound, and she decided, I'm not going to crash no matter what. And she managed to do that for a whole year. And 1 year later, she was running 16 kilometers. And that's a pretty good definition of recovery, right? So I think that we mustn't also forget that our body is still on our side. It's not easy. We also need luck. I often try to get these no crash pacing streaks together, and I get unlucky or whatever. But I think in principle, our body may have got this. So that's just a thought I wanted to leave you with for this part of the discussion.
And maybe just to add on that as a final note, Patrick, I've learned that as well. So since I've had such a big upswing in health, I now have the lived experience that recovery is possible. So my mindset has totally flipped from believing that it wasn't possible because I had tried so many things and nothing helped. And I was working with hundreds or thousands of patients who also were in a holding pattern, maybe having little improvements, but nothing really substantive. And now I realize that substantive improvement is possible. And, that's a whole other talk perhaps on mindset. But what we think and feel hardwires in our brain. It changes the biology of our brain and body. So I would just say, one of our reasons for doing today's session is to give that hope, to let you know both of us have been quite badly affected and we're both doing better. So recovery to, a mild, moderate, or significant degree is possible. So why don't we leave it there? Megan, I'm going to ask you to put the survey link in the chat. So in case people want to take a look at it during the break. We've gone a little bit over, but let's take a full 10 minutes because I need to step out of my van and get some fresh air. So we'll come back at 20 after the hour. And I think we can go up to half an hour. I know I have a hard stop at the start of the next hour. So
yeah, that's fine for me. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So this is the Q&A section of our event. And what I thought we maybe would do is start with a question that was emailed to me yesterday. So I've passed it on to Patrick. It's a really great question. And it sounds like Patrick and I may have some differing views on it. So it's about oral rehydration and whether it's better to take electrolytes or oral rehydration fluid. So I don't know, Patrick, if you want to share. You've shared already a little bit that you like the oral rehydration formula better.
Yes, I mean, it's not something that I have any kind of definite answer to, but I have experimented a lot with these things over the years. And
Hmm.
for me, with the ORS, I have a pretty immediate positive effect from it that feels different from when I have added electrolytes in other ways or just put salt on my food. And so it's very, very quick, positive, beneficial effects. So that's kind of important from my lived experience. And that makes sense in terms of what it's doing because it's a glucose sodium co-transporter makes it means that the solution boosts blood volume very quickly. Um, and I personally have found that if I have a lot of salt in a normal way, I feel worse. Um, I get kind of disoriented and my muscles get weaker.
Hmm.
Now, if I have some salt, I do need to add some salt to my food because I often crave salt, but I have to find just the right amount. And if I ended up going a high salt diet, I actually end up feeling worse, and I think that's because my body can't process it as easily as in the oral rehydration solution.
Okay. So I think the big difference is one, the oral rehydration solution has glucose and electrolytes typically don't. I've never tried oral rehydration solution. I've written about it. It's in one of my blog posts. I've even got photos of different brands and things. So for me, for many years, I took sodium chloride. And then actually it was through Dr. Demilier, he said, oh, try this kind of mixed electrolyte. So it's mostly sodium, but with some potassium, calcium, and magnesium salts, and it's citrate and bicarbonate salts of those four minerals. And I found the mixed electrolytes more beneficial for me. Like I just feel better and it lasts longer, and I don't have to take as much. I saw one question in, but again, we're all different, you know. So I would say if you're trying one and it's not really working, try the other and see. It's inexpensive and relatively safe experiment. Um, I'm gonna maybe go through the chat. Some of these are more for me and some more for Patrick, but there's one. Um, isn't cell danger response the first layer that needs to be addressed along with proper vagal tone? So here's my take on that. My understanding of cell danger response is it's the state the body's in when the normal healing cycle can't fully proceed and get us back to full health. And so my understanding of the cell danger response is that we don't yet have a direct strategy. Like you can't say to the cells, hey guys, it's okay. Mitochondria can start up again and it's not going to do irreparable harm. In my mind, the language of the body is what we do. So if I live my life kind of like Patrick talked about pacing, if I live my life in a way that I never push too hard outside of my energy envelope or my stress envelope or my diet envelope, I've got all these envelopes that I kind of live within. I think that's my way of communicating to the cells that everything's okay. But if I'm bouncing all over the place in terms of energy, diet, sleep, stress, etc., my cells are going, it's not safe out there. We need to stay in this kind of down-regulated state. And I don't know that we found that vagal tone and cell danger response have a direct connection. Of course, the vagus nerve is everywhere all the time, but I'm not sure if there's, and maybe some of you know, maybe, there's lots of research I haven't read, but I'm not sure those two things are necessarily connected. What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, no, I've not heard of that connection either myself. But I do very much agree with you that um, the illness gets our body into this cell danger response, and it's our body in its
Yeah,
wisdom that will have to get us out of it.
right. And I just couldn't agree more. Like I'm getting older and I have more of a past to kind of reflect upon. And some days I just sit in amazement that my body hasn't given up on me. All the crazy things I've tried, the number of times I haven't listened to it, and it's still hanging in there. And on a daily basis, I'm feeling well. It's kind of amazing. Someone's saying, I hope you will talk about these two treatments, methylene blue and red light therapy. So I have not personally tried methylene blue, but I do have a red infrared light machine that I've used for about 10 years. I don't find for me personally, it's a game changer in terms of my overall health. I do it anyway. I have it with me in the back of my van. So I do it when I have what I call owies. So, if I have pain or soreness, arthritis, all those things that happen with age, I find the red and infrared light is really helpful. Sometimes I'll do it just to the back of my neck to try to energize all the blood that's passing through. Red and infrared light work in so many different ways. To some small degree, it may help compensate for lack of sunlight. So that's kind of from quantum biology, that most of us live 96% of our lives inside, and we're depriving ourselves of red and infrared because it can't penetrate the modern low-E glass that we mostly have in our houses. And we're living in a severe deficiency of red and infrared light, according to certain people like Scott Zimmerman and Bob Fosbury. So I would say getting outside is the best way to get red and infrared light. And I think that's why I feel so good when I'm in my van, because I'm outside or almost outside almost all the time. I can't talk about methylene blue. Um, I'm aware that it kind of acts on redox and tries to shift the cells to a state in which potentially the mitochondria can start working again. But I don't know if you've tried it, Patrick.
No, I've never tried methylene blue, and my own red light journey is just starting at the moment.
Mm,
I got a red light blanket from China
mm,
just arrived a few days ago, so I'll be trying that out over the coming months.
okay. Of course, my only fear about that is that now you've got electricity on your person and, um,
Mhm.
man-made electromagnetic frequencies are under-recognized, potentially very severe problem that our cells don't know how to interpret those frequencies because all of the native frequencies from the sun are the full spectrum of visible and invisible light, and they're constantly changing from sunrise to sunset. So whenever we expose ourselves to some um, like unchanging frequency, like whether even if it's a red light or a blue light or a green light, um, the body doesn't know how to interpret it because it's something we didn't evolve to understand. So I
That's
personally
very
have never
interesting.
used that for that reason.
Okay, I will ponder that. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, so I'm not going to comment on the statements. I'm going to try to focus in on the questions. Um, so someone's saying, I have reverse T3 as spoken about. I wake up exhausted every morning too. Should I go off my desiccated thyroid? So desiccated thyroid is different than pure T3 that Patrick was talking about. Desiccated is a biologically balanced mix of T3 and T4. And in my practice over the years, I often found that desiccated thyroid was better than using either pure T3 or pure T4. Um, so of course, we can't give any medical advice whether you should or shouldn't go off something, but that's just a little bit of background for those who may not be aware. Patrick, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I agree with what you say, Ellie. I'm just going to write in the name of the person I mentioned, Paul Robinson. He's
Mm,
written three very helpful books about this kind of low T3 syndrome, and I think his guidance is great if you want to if you want to look more into this problem. Um, the nature of what I was talking about was purely related to T3 monotherapy. And
hmm
the solution that tends to work for people is this circadian T3 method, which Paul Robinson developed, which is you take the first dose at 4 a.m. and then you do actually stimulate your adrenal glands to create cortisol. Now, I didn't want to do that because I don't want to wake up at 4 a.m. So but for Paul, that's fine. He has an alarm, a little alarm every night. He's done it for 20 years. And this was key for him in getting his health back. And there are other people too who take T3, their first dose, in the middle of the night. So I was only really speaking from that pure T3 perspective. I wouldn't be able to comment on the desiccated thyroid.
Here's a question. What about Epstein-Barr / mono creating ME/CFS theory? So I'll ask Patrick as well. My take on that is we're now changing the terminology. So if you look at the clinical guide that was just published by the Bateman Horne Center a few months ago, and if all the duckies line up, I'm going to be releasing a podcast tomorrow with Talia Ruscioni, who's the executive director of Bateman Horne. So she's going to talk a lot about all of the resources they have available. But in the title of that guide, it says ME/CFS, long COVID, and I hope I get the letters right, infection-associated IACCs, so infection-associated chronic conditions. So I would say most people in the field, in both the ME and the long COVID field, are saying, you know what, these infection-triggered events that we experience share a lot, probably more in common than they differ. And we're now kind of bringing them together, which is great because we can pool all of the research and experience from, for example, long COVID. So I would say, yes, there are many infections which can trigger an infection-associated chronic condition, and Epstein-Barr is one of them. COVID-19 is one of them. Um, I was just at the conference yesterday. Enterovirus is one of them, even Giardia. So there's many bugs that are triggers for this kind of constellation of symptoms where potentially the body is stuck in the cell danger response and can't quite finish or complete healing. Do you want to add to
Yeah,
that
I just
at all?
yeah, I'll just add to that. It's also interesting to remember just how many triggers there are for ME/CFS and how we nevertheless end up with something, very similar in the sense that people are
Yeah.
experiencing PEM and having exercise intolerance. There may be differences around the edges, but the core is very similar, even if it differs in severity. And I really admire the work of Wirth and Scheibenbogen from Germany, about whom I often talk, because they have this unifying model of ME/CFS, which kind of works independent of whatever the initial trigger was. And in my own case, I wasn't infection based. Mine was stress and trauma based. And yet my ME/CFS is very similar in the core regards to what someone after mononucleosis, for example.
Great, thank you. So someone's saying, I've been down these lines thinking that mold is involved. I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And Lyme too, and maybe rickettsia, but the tests have all been cost prohibitive. And I thought about what the next steps would be and how much they would cost. That's such a good point. And I would add to that if the treatment's even available, right? So in Canada, for example, getting treatment for Lyme is extremely difficult. Um, some places it's impossible. So it's a good point. And just to say a little bit about my Lyme treatment. So many years later, after I did that IV treatment and then a whole bunch of oral antibiotics, like for a full year, I was going at it hardcore and nothing changed and my lab results didn't change. But about 10 years later, just for the sake of completeness, I had all the tests done again and they were better. They weren't totally normal, but they had improved. And my my thought about that is really what Patrick's been saying. You know what? My body figured out a way to heal. And I'm not sure if the very invasive treatment that I did helped my body, hindered it, or didn't make any difference. I think in the end, my body did most of the work, but that's only, it's only my best guess. Patrick, do you want to take a few?
Just to look through a few. Okay.
Yeah. So I think I've answered that one. Dr. Perrin's lymph treatment is being recommended. LDN is helping.
Oh, yeah.
So I think what we'll do is Megan will integrate in her usual amazing way the comments and experience that people are sharing in the chat with the additional information that some of you will put in the survey to kind of make one document where we have, here's all the things that helped people and here's all the things that didn't. And some of the things are going to show up on both lists. Right, so N-acetylcysteine, butyrate, all those things I've tried don't work for me. In fact, make me worse. Can you write about, oh, so I think there was quite a few chats about the HELP apheresis. I think we've got that one clarified. So someone's saying I've had very positive results from fecal transplant. And this one's really a frustrating one. I remember when I was in Australia, like 27 years ago, I went and visited Tom Barodi. He was one of the pioneers in fecal transplantation for ME. He was very generous. I hung out at his clinic, talked to his patients, asked them heaps of questions. And I came back from that thinking fecal transplant is going to be really helpful. I don't know the details, but a large study was done, I believe, in Norway that didn't pan out. I think they actually stopped the study early because they weren't seeing a positive result. And this is just an example of how something can make sense and you have the means and the will and you do the study and it just doesn't always work.
Yeah, and Ellie, I might just briefly mention on the blood washing because just to clarify
Yeah, there's
briefly.
lots of questions.
Yeah, so the main ones are the HELP apheresis, which is the blood thinning one, very targeted with heparin. There's plasmapheresis, which is available in the USA, as someone notes, but it's much blunter. It's kind of, to my understanding, it's sort of replacing your whole plasma. So it's a much more involved procedure still and has more side effects. And then there's immunoabsorption, which is in Germany as well, which is also used in ME/CFS research. And it takes out the autoantibodies that are part of the disease. And these are autoantibodies that are often causing blood perfusion issues, more cellular issues, and so on. And some people have great responses to that too. Um, and that's very targeted as well, just on the autoantibodies, so it's much more selective. So plasmapheresis, very blunt. HELP is selective for microclots. Mainly, it also takes out some cholesterol. And immunoabsorption is selective for autoantibodies.
Great. And I just released a podcast, I can't remember how many weeks ago, but very recently with Eric Gordon, and it's on the topic of plasmapheresis. So anyone who wants to learn more about that, he's got quite a bit of experience with it. Patrick, someone's asking, could you mention the name of the clinic you visited in Germany?
Yeah, it's Bayreuth is the German pronunciation. If you're English, you might say Bayreuth, but it's Bayreuth in Bavaria. I'll just write it in the chat so people can see the spelling.
Great, thank you.
Very good, very good place. Really recommend it. No problems there.
Someone's asking what type of sauna I use. So this runs into really the bigger question because it's not maybe so important what I use, but what does the research say? So I was listening, Rhonda Patrick, she is a professor. She has had probably one of the longest standing health podcasts ever, more than 10 years now, called Found My Fitness. And she was just talking with Peter Attia about sauna. And apparently, if you take a wet sauna, the temperature is higher and you don't have to stay in as long to get the same result as if you're in an infrared sauna with a lower temperature. I don't know what mine would be classified as, but it's a dry sauna. And it does have infrared in it, but I'm honestly not sure that's the main mechanism. What I've said over the years from my experiences, I don't think it matters the type of sauna as long as you sweat. So the key about sauna is that you sweat. When you sweat, you get rid of toxins. And when you sweat, it's a hormetic stress. The body sweating means your body is recognizing that the heat's a little bit too much, and the sweating is a way to cool the body. So as long as you, whatever type of sauna or steam room, hot shower, I'm sure there's other things I can't think of. Whatever you do, as long as you sweat, and I'd say sweat for about 10 minutes, you're going to have a positive effect, in my opinion. Is it safe to have a sauna if you have asthma? Absolutely. I can't think of a reason why asthma would present a problem unless you have, so people have cold-induced asthma. I'm not sure if there's such a thing as heat-induced asthma. So if your experience is that heat triggers your asthma, then I would definitely consult your pulmonary physician. And yes, I am in the Okanagan. I'm on the south side of Okanagan Lake right now in Penticton. Would I recommend cold showers? So I've actually, at first I was very dismissive, like, no, you have to plunge into a cold mountain lake. But again, listening to the experts, they say, yep, a cold shower. Like, I don't know about you, but in Calgary, if I just turn the water on, but no, like the hot water doesn't come on, it's very, very, very cold. So again, how do you know that your cold exposure is the right amount? It's because you start shivering. You start feeling uncomfortably cold and potentially start shivering. Then it's time to get out. And your body has received the message and it upregulates all of these very powerful pathways to make us more resilient. Please, in an email to registrants, spell out the protocols. So we're actually going to, like I said, list, like we're going to take the chat and we're going to put it together with the survey results. So you'll have everything in writing. So someone asked oral rehydration 3 liters a day. I believe that many people drink too much. So I know this is opposite, like everything out there online is you need to drink more. We're all dehydrated. The way we become hydrated is not by drinking. It's by producing pure deuterium depleted metabolic water. So that's a lot. And just yesterday, Dr. Stephanie Seneff did an amazing webinar on glyphosate and how it interacts with deuterium to cause health problems. And Dr. Laszlo Borosh has done a webinar a couple of months ago. All of those are available on my website. So to learn more. But when we burn energy and the mitochondria make water, right? So if you take plants, you have water and carbon dioxide gets made into the carbon, like the carbohydrate carbon structure of the plant. We take that plant and we burn it and we produce carbon dioxide and water. It's the exact mirror image of photosynthesis. And that water that we produce in our mitochondria is pure deuterium depleted metabolic water. And that's what hydrates us, not how much we drink. I know that's a radical idea, but I've seen the science enough that I'm buying it. Buteyko breathing. Thanks for everybody who added to that. Yes, there will be a recording. Someone said they joined late, so no problem. Everyone registered will get an email with a link to the recording. It'll be on my and Patrick's YouTube pages. Some people are dropping off because we're going so long. Totally understandable. Okay, looks like a pacing question. So deep pacing works when I track my steps and activity level. The problem is that I don't fit in the functional capacity scale. So the functional capacity scale has some drawbacks. It talks about cognitive energy, emotional energy, and physical energy as all varying together. But in many of us, they don't. Some people crash physically, some emotionally, some cognitively. And those three sometimes don't don't aggregate together. So this person says, so I might be able to do a few minutes of activities. I'm confused about how to measure. So I would say make up your own scale. Figure out what are the things that are important to you. Is it to be able to think clearly? Is it to be able to do certain activities? Is it to have certain social interactions? Make your own scale and keep track. So it doesn't matter which scale you use. It just matters that you keep track enough so that you can figure out for you which types of self-management help you stabilize and improve. Do you want to say anything about that, Patrick?
Um, yeah, I mean, for me, the times pacing has worked well, and I'm not the world's best person at pacing. Is I really like Dr. Perrin. He has a very nice. He has a 50% rule. Is do 50% of
Yeah.
what you think you can do without causing a crash. And the great thing about that is it's adaptive. So when you are feeling better, that 50% is still more than at the beginning when you were not feeling so good. And the times when I've stuck at a 50% rule, even just for a few weeks, that works pretty well for me. But it's quite intuitive rather than too, it's more. I couldn't necessarily scientifically describe it, but it's intuitive.
Great, thank you. So there were a couple couple questions about the AIP diet. So I'm not sure what the eliminate stage is. I eat vegetables, fruit, and formerly moving proteins. That's it. So if that's the eliminate stage, then I guess I'm still on it. How do I get enough calories? Oh my gosh, I eat a lot. Megan can attest to that. So absolutely no problem getting enough calories. Um, and yes, so olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, palm oil, those are all things I partake of often. Um, when someone with ME crashes and has a burnout and they just want to sleep all the time, should we let them or try to manage their sleep? Oh, this is near and dear to my heart. So if someone's sleeping, guess what? They need the sleep. Their body is clearly communicating the need for sleep. So I would never, ever wake and try to rouse and push someone with ME or long COVID to not do what their body tells them they need to do. What about you, Patrick?
Yes, no, I completely agree, Ellie, there. Yeah.
Oh, and someone said Alberta Health Services. So I live in Alberta, so that's good to see. They actually have a great document on how to make your own oral rehydration solution. Someone said they couldn't get the survey link to work, so I don't know if that's generally true or just that one person. Any results from PEMF, so pulsed EMF therapies? So, Patrick, I don't know if you have experience with that. I do not, and it's something it's high on my list to research more because there's actually some pretty good studies out there using pulsed EMF mostly for pain. I'm not sure if it would help with fatigue or PEM, but stay tuned because it's something I'm planning to look into very soon. Right. Molecular hydrogen. So if you go to my, some people have asked like, which exact product do I use? So anticipating that question, if you go to my website and there's tabs across the top and one of them is store, if you scroll right to the bottom, the last, I think it's called other products or something like that. I do not sell it myself, but I have a link there to the exact product that I use. And it's from a company called Drink HRW. It was the company founded by Alex Tarnava. So I figure like he's the guy who invented the product. So he's since sold the company because now he's kind of working as a consultant worldwide. Um, but the reason I have stuck with that company is because they're the only company with a Canadian distributor, which means you don't have to pay high like import duties and tariffs and conversion to US dollars. So there's a Canadian dollar link there and a US dollar link. And if you live in Europe, the US dollar link is the one to use. Thank you for an amazing talk. I need to go. So that's totally understandable. Need to go, need to go. Um, Really appreciate Patrick's openness about his lived experience and struggling with the disease. I agree. I think that's what we were hoping today is we weren't putting ourselves up as some kind of experts, but to say even the two of us who have a ton of knowledge and experience, we have some wins, but we also make some errors, right? That if we had to do it again, we might do it differently. I think, just looking at the time as well, do you see any other questions there, Patrick, that we haven't? So someone's left a YouTube video on methylene blue. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and someone's saying that the muscle necrosis might explain how unpleasant a crash is. That's absolutely the case,
Yeah.
particularly the more severe crashes. Um, and that's probably caused by calcium overload in the muscles, because that can actually kill the cell. And that's part of the German research that I really think is great. So yes, yes, but this is why PEM feels so awful.
And this is someone, I think, sharing that methylene blue. She says, I have ME/CFS in less than a week. I think it's referring to methylene blue has changed my life. I have more physical and mental energy. And then they're talking about there's some different links that have been shared about how to acquire it. One thing I've heard about methylene blue is it's really important to test it because, or is that methylene blue? Well, I'm maybe going to stop there before I get myself into trouble, but I think there's a way of testing it to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting. I think we've answered the difference between ORS and electrolytes is basically that oral rehydration solution has glucose in it. Is there a maximum dosage? So again, in keeping with the person earlier who put that they take, I don't know if it was a statement or a question about 3 liters. In my opinion, that would be too much. I would say, we get fluid in a lot of our food, especially fruit and vegetables. So I would say 2 liters is probably the most that we need. If we want to increase metabolic water, we need to get outside and get sunshine, and we need to eat more fat because fat has less deuterium and produces more pure water than carbohydrates and protein. Someone's asking, this is for you, Patrick, how far is the research on mitochondrial? Do they have money yet to do the research?
Yeah, so this, for people who don't know, this is Professor Cloudsphiere's potential ME/CFS pill. Could be the world's first approved medication for ME/CFS. Of course, we don't live in a world that seems to care too much about getting that to happen. At the moment, they have funding to cover up until March. They are doing toxicology studies and other early stage work. If they do not have the funding by March, they will have to stop that development work and seek the funding, which they will still try to do, but that's the kind of current cutoff point for that. So if anyone knows some very wealthy people who might like to, pass $20 million over for some the necessary phase 2 trials into this pill, uh, you know, get in touch. But otherwise, it's going on until March at the moment.
Great, thank you. Someone's asking what supplements I suggest. So I did a short reel recently in which I share that I've gone off all my supplements except for the hydrogen water because I feel so well. I just don't feel that I need them. There's other complicated reasons as well, but I'm adverse to paying money for things that aren't, making a tangible difference. Someone's asking, will I be addressing brain retraining? So brain retraining for me and, everything I've learned, I've now packaged into my 2 courses, Retraining Your Brain for Better Health, which is kind of my beginner course, and then Healing Through Neuroplasticity, which is the more comprehensive course. So if you want to know what I did, that's where you can find it in depth. Brain training helped me with chemical sensitivity. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in my list. I would definitely take it with me to the desert island, but I change it up. I have studied and practice many different strategies. I don't just stick with one because I get bored easily. It has not helped with fatigue. I think for me, diet is really the key there. And unfortunately, it hasn't helped with I'll call them food intolerance, the fact that I'm still on the AIP diet after 8 years. I wish I weren't, and the brain retraining hasn't helped with that. So again, I know many people who have improved their food sensitivity issue. We're all different. I'm just noticing we have 5 more minutes, so we need to wind up. I think why don't we leave it there? Because There's a ton more questions, but I think many of them we've at least touched upon. Someone's asking about a specific supplement, for example, NAC. So I don't tolerate NAC, right? It's supposed to be the most bland, easy to tolerate thing ever. It builds glutathione level, which is an antioxidant. It doesn't work for me. So I would say for any supplement, I have a webinar by Teresa Dowell where she does a really great review of all the supplements that she has found helpful in her practice. And I had to say I really agreed and supported with much of what she said. So that might be a good resource. So I think we should leave it there just because I have to go to another call. And I apologize to those. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up, Patrick, in a few months because we didn't get to all the questions.
Yes, Ellie, I'd be up for that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Really, really appreciate your interest. Like I said, it is recorded. Megan's going to put the survey once again in the chat right now. Please fill it out if you'd like your experience compiled into a list that what I'm thinking of is posting that list on my social media site, so it'll be available to everybody. The cold lake. So right now I'm putting my feet in the cold lake because many of you know I have a severe foot issue. So I'm trying to decrease the inflammation in my foot. Oh my gosh, so many questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get to them. So I think that means we need a part 2 where we talk less and have more time for questions. Thank you so much, Patrick. This was so fun doing this with you.
Thank you, Ellie. It was really fun for me as well. And yeah, I'd definitely be up for a part 2.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining me on the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. I hope you are taking away new strategies and ideas to improve your health and a renewed sense of hope. Join me, Dr. Eleanor Stein, for our next episode. Can't wait? Check out my website for a wealth of free resources.